It's like the top 5 leading cause of death in Canada. A lot more people are being euthanized than the numbers reflect. It's cheaper to kill someone than to treat them, as though that's not straight out of Nazi Germany. You got a fentanyl crisis out of control in Canada because Canada's already been infiltrated by the Chinese Communist Party.
What is the state of radical Islam in Canada? What is the Canadian government doing, if anything, to combat that issue?
It's a powder keg. More people on terror watch lists are apprehended trying to cross from Canada into America than from Mexico into America. I don't know where it goes from here, but it doesn't look good.
And welcome back to The Brief. We are joined today by Viva Frei. Viva is a former Canadian lawyer, a former political candidate for the People's Party of Canada. He's a popular YouTuber. And for the sake of our conversation, Viva, you are our expert Canadian scholar in residence. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So the impetus of this conversation is MAID, Medical Assistance in Dying, which has caused an international firestorm with political commentators like Matt Walsh tweeting about it all this week, garnering tens of millions of views. In Canada, there were more than 17,000 cases of medical assistance in dying in the year 2024 alone. MAID now accounts for roughly 5% of all Canadian deaths. So my question first and foremost is, can you talk about the political history of MAID in Canada?
Yeah, people have to appreciate it. First of all, these are the official numbers, which I don't believe whatsoever, because I believe a lot more people are being euthanized to death, and I'm not even trying to be funny, than the numbers reflect. And it's exponential growth year over year. And just to open up one parenthesis, medical assistance in dying. They give it a name like MAID. Maids, like you're cleaning a house or something. It's as much of a euphemism for what's going on as what they had back in Action for Nazi Germany, mercy killings, because that's exactly where it's going. It started off 2016, 2017, I might be off on the year. Supreme Court came down and said, you can't deny the right to die with dignity to those who are terminally ill. And I don't have any problem with that. In fact, I support it. I've seen people suffer through cancer that you say, the death is inevitable over any certain period of time. Let them die with dignity before they become, riddled with pain that makes life not even worth bearing. But what they did at the time, and it was an unsolicited, addition to this legislation that the Liberals were passing. They say, hey, let's extend it to the mentally ill, because you don't want to deny the constitutional right to people who are unable to contract in certain places, legally speaking. You don't want to deny their ability to go and off themselves. And so let's add the right to death to the mentally ill. And there was some backlash, some concerns that it would be, abused and expanded beyond the scope of what the Supreme Court initially wanted. And they said that we're going to sunset that. We're going to, not allow it for the time being. And now I think it's been pushed back to policy to 2027, if I'm not mistaken. And then what happens? Canada basically becomes almost the epicenter of medical assistance in dying, euthanasia, or as far as I'm concerned, in many cases, state-sanctioned murder. And it goes from several hundred to several thousand to 13,000 to 17,000 last. People who are not terminally ill are getting killed. People with what they call multiple chemical sensitivity, an Ontario woman, couldn't get proper lodging for her severe allergies, killed. The woman who was featured in a Simon's ad, which is a retail clothing line, they made a 3-minute montage to her, something called like Life is Beautiful or All is Beautiful. She didn't want to die. She, in a Facebook post, said, I can't get health care, so I may as well get death care. It is state-sanctioned murder that is basically intended to save the state money in its health care costs.
Even now, as I seek help to end my life, there is still so much beauty. You just have to be brave enough to see it.
I want to talk about this woman in her 80s who was euthanized in Ontario after telling medical staff she actually wanted to live and receive hospice care. That's according to the review board. The review board said her death was approved and carried out the same day after her husband requested a second assessment. So this woman, she's identified as Mrs. B. She had recently undergone coronary artery bypass surgery. She initially requested euthanasia, but later told an assessor she had changed her mind and she wanted palliative care due to her personal beliefs, her religious beliefs. Again, this is all according to the review committee itself. So when a person is euthanized against their will, I've always understood that as homicide, but apparently I'm missing something. Can you help me understand where I'm wrong on this?
I can't help you understand it because it doesn't make any sense. It's like the second you get a medical expert report, to say it's euthanasia, it's no longer state-sanctioned murder. It's not even the first case of this. There was the case of a young gentleman who suffered from mental illness, who was depressed, who was put to death because he asked for it, and he found a doctor the second time around to approve it where it had previously been rejected. You have cases where veterans with PTSD are calling Veterans Affairs, being offered medical assistance in dying. Kayla Pollock, I'm sure you've heard of this story. She's a woman who was rendered a quadriplegic from the Moderna booster after 2 Pfizer shots. They offered her death unsolicited 3 times. And it's almost like a joke where you have suicide hotlines and you wonder, are they actually talking people out of it, or is it like a client list that the government is acquiring? There's no legal justification for what happened to that elderly lady, allegedly. I say allegedly because maybe there's attenuating circumstances. It's almost as though you ask for it and the Grim Reaper of the Canadian government is going to come get you regardless of whether or not you change your mind. And I mean, like they say in law, it's cheaper to kill someone than it is to injure them. And under the Canadian healthcare system, it's cheaper to kill them than it is to treat them.
So I think one of the more disturbing parts of what you were saying is the state sanctioning of this type of suicide. I want to read a direct quote and get your reaction to it. New research suggests, this was proponents of euthanasia who were talking about this project in the early 2015-2016, and they had said, new research suggests medically assisted dying could result in substantial savings across Canada's healthcare. This sounds like out of 1984. Doctor-assisted death could reduce annual healthcare spending across the country by between 35 million to 137 million. This is according to the Canadian Medical Association Journal. The savings exceedingly outweigh the estimated 1.5 to 15 million in direct costs associated with implementing medically assisted dying. So it seems like the proponents of medically assisted suicide were talking about in quite objective monetary terms that this is actually going to save us a lot of money. Again, I feel like, to quote Zoolander, I'm kind of on crazy pills here. The proponents were saying that you should actually support the policy of euthanasia because it will save us money. Is that really how the proponents are framing the conversation?
Not anymore, because it would seem politically unpalatable to even suggest something like that. But thank goodness for archived links, because when I've been covering this for a little while, but only as of the time when they had 13,000 people killed. And I'm like, my brother sent me this link, and I'm like, it's not possible that 13,000. It's like the top 5 leading cause of death in Canada, and at one point in Quebec, it was number 3 leading cause of death. They had to pull back the jab. No, but can you imagine just the absurdity? Yeah, who would have thunk it's cheaper to kill someone than to treat them? Thanks, Sherlock. And then the way they go about this, they have the law come into effect. And I put up a tweet to this effect, like, the tale of Canada in 4 steps. They put up the law, they sunset the mental illness killing them, as though that's not straight out of Nazi Germany killing handicapped, mentally ill, mentally challenged people. Then they have their state-funded media, because bear in mind, this was the CBC reporting this back in 2017. State-funded media saying, don't worry, guys, it's not all bad when we start killing citizens. It might actually save you money. And then they start passing laws, which I'm sure you also know, of presumptive organ donation. And under these laws, Avery's Law in New Brunswick, you don't even have to be dead for them to make the assessment that they're going to collect your organs. It just has to be in the assessment of the professional at the hospital. I don't know if they use the word coroner, but that death is reasonably foreseeable. And they can declare you dead and collect your organs. Eventually, and you're going to see it, Shabbos, they're going to say, not only will it save you money, we can actually harvest the organs and it'll help the healthcare system. This is all at the same time of mass immigration, open borders, imports who are not contributing to the system, overwhelming the healthcare system. And what the government is saying is, it's not a great replacement, but you're going to die off or we're going to kill you off while we bring in more people to exacerbate the very problem that we say killing you off is going to resolve economic hardships on the system.
So I do want to get to the issue of migration in Canada, but just before I do, can you please just dumb it down for me so I have crystal clarity on what you just said? You are telling me that of the top 5 causes of death in Canada, one of them is medically assisted suicide. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah. You look it up. It's top 5 leading causes of death. At one point, and I don't think I'm misremembering this, it was the 3rd leading cause of death in Quebec, because Quebec was the epicenter. And it was a Daily Mail article that broke it. It's the 3rd leading cause of death. And then the government had to pull back the rapidity with which they were administering death to Quebecers. And you understand, there was a guy, by the way, who was administered death because of vaccine injury. And so they implement policy that gets Canadians injured while telling them safe and effective, and then say, we'll kill you. And we'll end your misery that we imposed on you. I mean, it's Kafkaesque, it's Orwellian on steroids. It would be funny if it weren't so damn tragic. But it's the absolute state of Canada right now, and it's a sign of things that are to come potentially to the rest of the world. It's just the way it is. Like, it desensitizes almost a people to say, oh, well, they're doing it in Canada, they're doing it in Belgium, so why not do it in California, in Michigan, in New York?
Okay, let me let me move on to an equally depressing topic, particularly Mark Carney. I have to apologize because when I go to Canada quite often to speak, and before the elections, I was speaking to a campaign, and I had said, well, one of the good things about having Justin Trudeau is you've hit rock bottom. So, just by process of elimination, it can't really get any worse. And then, enter Mark Carney. One of the things, of which there are many things to focus on, but one of the things I want to focus on is in particular his gun buyback program. So the whole idea of a gun buyback program was you would voluntarily give back your guns, and in return, the state would provide some type of financial compensation. However, what we have noticed, as with anything Mark Carney has touched, is there's sort of a string attached to it. And in particular, gun owners, at least in Ottawa, who refuse to comply with this voluntary gun buyback program could face up to 5 years in prison. So my question for you is twofold. Number one, is this accurate? Because this sounds too stupid to be true. And then the second point is, when it comes to gun control in Canada, can you just educate myself and educate our viewers? What is the state of gun ownership within Canada today?
Well, it's basically criminalized. And I was a gun owner in Canada. I took my course. It's a 2-day course, which I think makes sense. You have to, pass the course, pass the test. Then you have to get a background check. If you're married, your spouse has to authorize you to own a firearm. And then that authorization is good or say sign off on you owning it. It's good for 5 years. But that's only for a long arm. That's only for like a shotgun, a hunting rifle. For small arms, basically criminalized. You can get a special PAL. It's I forget the exact acronym, but an acquisition license for a small arm. It's effectively criminalized. You can't transport them anywhere. You can only get one for, good security reasons or for competitive shooting. And so they have this gun buyback now under the cloak of COVID, by the way, by order in council, which means it didn't even have to go through any, debate. It was allowed within the law that the government could issue by order in council more restrictions on firearms. They outlawed another 1,500, 1,600 firearms, which were all at one point even caught up like legit bona fide duck hunting shotguns. And they used a shooting in Nova Scotia as the pretext and COVID as the cover. But right now it starts off as voluntary. And then it becomes mandatory, much like it was voluntary to get the COVID shot,
right,
until they made vaccine mandates and said, now you got a vaccine passport that you got to live by, or if you want to fly, you got to get it. So it's just they're outlawing more and more firearms as though the problem is lawful firearm ownership. It isn't. And you can go check out the graph. It's something that I post every now and again. The more gun laws get tough in Canada, the more gun crime there is. And it's like an amazing, shocking statistic. It's almost like the criminals who commit crimes with guns don't care that they're legal or illegal. They're going to get them, and they're going to get them regardless of whether or not they're illegal. But the gun laws are getting increasingly stringent. Gun crime is going up year over year. And yeah, my understanding is as well that it's voluntary, and you can also choose to go to jail if you don't voluntarily surrender your gun for buyback. It's confiscation from law-abiding gun owners. And the criminals are still having their guns, and there are police. You can look this clip up. It's amazing. I think it's the Peel Regional Police literally telling people, leave your fobs for your cars by your front door because the criminals, they have real guns and they're loaded. They just want your stuff. They don't want to hurt you. So make it easier for them to steal your stuff because they've got the real loaded guns and you've got nothing except relying on cops that are going to be there 20 minutes after you've been shot and possibly worse.
I want to pivot to foreign policy just for a moment. So Prime Minister Mark Carney's new approach to Canada's foreign policy can probably be distilled in a line he recently gave where he said, quote, "We take the world as it is, not as we wish it to be." This was in response when he was asked about the deal Canada struck with China recently, despite concerns over China's human rights record, and nearly a year after Mark Carney himself called China, quote, "the biggest security threat facing Canada." So can you just distill for us, what does the Chinese-Canadian relationship look like today? And does Prime Minister Mark Carney want a closer alliance with the Chinese Communist Party?
Canada's already been infiltrated by the Chinese Communist Party. We'll start off with that. First, he takes the world not as it is. He takes the world as he makes it. Because these are not decisions that don't have an impact on the world. He's actively creating a reality where Canada is a national security threat to these United States of America. The Chinese Communist Party, and people have to understand this, has already infiltrated the Canadian government. And people are going to take that clip out of context. We have 11 or 12 MPs who are either unwitting or witting agents of the CCP, and their names haven't been identified yet. The ties of Canada and Chinese scientists in Winnipeg to the COVID virus are undeniable, and I would dare say criminal. And then these two Chinese scientists go and disappear into the mountains of Wuhan at some point during COVID. You've got Chinese gangs running gambling and potential blackmail operations in Canada. It's too late. You got a fentanyl crisis out of control in Canada because of the Chinese control over money laundering, gambling, blackmail, and Canada it has a number of what they call fentanyl super labs. And so Canada's already been effectively infiltrated, if not outright taken over by the CCP, which I think explains what Carney is doing right now. And Carney, for those who don't know, he's a 3-passport carrying globalist whore. This didn't come up enough during the Canadian election, and I faulted Pierre Poilievre for not hammering this home, and he didn't, and what happened happened. Carney spent the last decade as the chair on the Bank of, I would say the Bank of England. I forget I think it's the Bank of England. He hadn't lived in Canada for a decade. He was Justin Trudeau's financial advisor in the background for about 4 years. He's a globalist of the highest order. He's a WEF Bilderberg attendee. So that gives you an idea as to who he is. And he just came in there, swooped in, and became prime minister, and will now put the final nails in the coffin of Canada by not just not cooperating with America, but by becoming a security threat to America.
Let me ask you one last question pertaining to foreign policy. The beginning of President Trump's second term had him positioning himself to be the next ruler of Canada by annexing Canada and becoming the 51st state. My assumption is that someone must have told President Trump about Quebec, because President Trump is no longer interested in annexing Canada and Canada becoming the 51st state. But I just have to ask, what is the state of affairs? Is there still a serious discussion either in DC or in Canada about the annexation of the country?
I don't think it was ever serious. I think it was always intended to be a joke, and any able and adept politician in Canada could have run with it as the joke that it was intended to be. Forget Quebec. It's ironic that you're going to take a province that itself wanted to be a separate country and then incorporate it into America. I don't think he wants Ontario either, politically speaking. But the reality is, what I believe that he wanted ultimately was the resources out of Alberta, maybe some agreements with the province of Alberta. And what he did, people think it was sort of interfered with Canadian politics and shaped the way the election went. It was Canada's response to that, what I think was a quip, a joke, that determined the outcome of that election. Anyone would have said, we're a proud independent country, but we're happy to work with you, but don't rely on the Liberals, and that's why you should vote Conservative. But no, you think he wants another New York, Michigan, or California to join America and vote Democrat? No. He wants the resources or access to of Alberta. I think he's going to get it at the end of the day. But what he's also gotten out of this is Carney effectively turning Canada into the threat that they're doing, which justifies even more his claim to some interests, if not in all of Greenland, which I think now is even all the more pressing given what's going on in Canada.
I would agree with that characterization. I have one last question. As I said, I go to Canada a lot. The last time I was in the airport in Montreal, I was actually held up. The airport security went through my social media. I often call Canada the Islamic Republic of Canada. I joke that Toronto is really Torontoistan, and we have an Ayatollah Mark Carney, who I hope is not listening, but if he is, thank you, Supreme Leader. But I do want to ask, though, we have seen that 4 in 10 Canadians say radicalized Islamists live in their communities. In fact, Canadians have expressed more concern about radical Islam than white supremacy as a motivation for attacks. We have seen an influx in foreign migrants, particularly from Muslim-majority countries, coming to Canada. So can you, again, just educate myself and educate our viewers, what is the state of radical Islam in Canada? And then part 2, what is the Canadian government doing, if anything, to combat that issue?
It's a powder keg. I mean, that's basically the only way to describe it. The risk is there. The risk is real. And it's even more so in Montreal and Quebec, I would say, than Ontario. Ontario, you got, there's primary demographics. The vast majority of new immigrants are coming from India. You got Pakistan, Nigeria. You've got undeniable elements of what is colloquially referred to as radical Islam. And Montreal, I would argue, is something of the epicenter. And you could see it during the protests that occurred subsequent to October 7, the occupations. When I went back for the summer, at one point, I forget when it was after October 7, McGill campus had been occupied by the what they call pro-Palestinian segment. This square in Old Montreal as well. What do they do about it? Nothing. I mean, they effectively pander to it and penalize the journalists that seek to expose it. Alexa Lavoie of Rebel News, Natasha Montreal, they go and expose these things, and they themselves get assaulted and arrested by the police because at some point it becomes a problem that you can no longer deal with in a politically palatable manner, because unfortunately, the damage is done, and it's tougher to combat the problem than it is to fight the people who are emphasizing or bringing the spotlight on that problem. And that's where it's at. It's real though, and if you wear a kippah, you walk around, you'll feel it. And we're told that there's no great replacement, and then we're told that they want to double the population by the end of the century to 80 million. And we know demographically where these new immigrants are coming from. And we know that some of them are being given visas that shouldn't be given visas, and that a lot of them are on terror watch lists trying to cross over into the States from Canada. Shabbos, if you don't know this will blow your mind also. It's something like 6 to 8 times more people on terror watch lists are apprehended trying to cross from Canada into America than from Mexico into America. So you put all that together, it's a recipe for disaster. It is a powder keg, and it's, some people say, and it's not a question of a fear hiding a wish, it's just an outright fear. Some people say, the massacre that we just saw in Bondi, it's only a matter of time before something like that occurs in Canada. But that is the reality of it, and I think right now the problem is too great to even solve.
I think I speak on behalf on the overwhelming majority of our PragerU audience when I say this conversation was as illuminating and educational as it was depressing and somber. But I really want to thank you for your clarity and for your perspective on these very difficult issues. And certainly Canada is in a really difficult spot, so we appreciate everything you've been doing.
My pleasure. I'll add one last thing. It's the reason why you're seeing something of the exodus from Canada, and this is how things, they enter the event horizon of cataclysmic disaster. Is as all these problems go on, you have a bit of the brain drain, you have the financial drain, and it just exacerbates the problem. It's I left because of COVID. But COVID was a symptom of the government's problem. It wasn't just the one element of it. But yeah, I don't know where it goes from here, but it doesn't look good.
And again, anecdotally, when I go to Canada, I often speak to young people, particularly on college campuses, and I ask them, do you see yourself having a future in this country? And almost all of them say no. Viva Frei is a former Canadian lawyer. He's a former political candidate for the People's Party of Canada and has a very popular and interesting YouTube show, so I encourage you all to check it out. Viva, thank you again for this conversation.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe. If you have any questions, comments, or if you want to see a particular topic addressed, make sure to put it down in the comments, and feel free to keep the conversation going through all of your questions or yellings or rants. Find me on social media. Just type in Shabbos Kestenbaum. You're not going to find many other Shabbos Kestenbaums, and I'm looking forward to speaking with you all very soon.